All right, let's talk about literary theory. I know. That phrase can sound, a little intimidating, maybe even kind of stuffy, but I promise you, it's something you're probably already doing, and it's the key to unlocking a whole new level in the stories you already love. So think about this for a second. Have you ever walked out of a movie and immediately started debating what that ending really meant? Or maybe you've argued with a friend that a character's true motivation was something totally different from what they saw. Of course you have. We've all been there.
Well, if you've done that, then congratulations. You were, in that very moment, practicing literary theory. Yep, at its heart, that's all it is. It's just a way of having that argument, but with a little more structure. You were doing the work without even putting a name to it.
Okay, so let's pull back the curtain a little bit and look at the official definition. What are we actually talking about when we use this fancy term? So, here it is. The key words here are systematic study. That just means that literary theory isn't about having a random opinion that you can't back up. It's about using a specific toolkit, a set of methods to analyze a text. It gives you a framework, a starting point for your interpretation. And this is my absolute favorite way to think about it. Imagine a story is a room full of interesting things, and theories are like different pairs of glasses. You put on one pair and suddenly you notice all the tiny details in the language, the metaphors, the sentence structure. Then you swap them for another pair, and wow, now you're seeing the historical context, the politics of the time it was written. The story itself doesn't change, but what you see in it changes completely. That's literary theory in a nutshell.
And this whole idea of digging into stories to see how they work, it's not new, not by a long shot. This is a conversation that people have been having for thousands of years all across the globe.
I mean, we can go way back to ancient Greece with Aristotle. He was literally breaking down what makes a play work in his book, Poetics. Then you had Longinus in ancient Rome, exploring what makes writing beautiful and powerful. Fast forward a bit to the medieval Middle East, where you have brilliant scholars like Al-Jahaz laying down the foundations of rhetoric. Now, it didn't really become a formal academic thing in universities until the 20th century, but that impulse, that need to understand stories, is as old as storytelling itself. So with all that history, you might think this is going to get super complex. But really, most of literary theory, all those different approaches, they're just trying to answer two big fundamental questions. First up, what even is literature? Seriously, is it just those dusty classic novels you had to read in school? Or can it be, well, anything? A lot of modern theorists would argue that, yeah, literature can refer to almost any use of language, a movie script, an advertisement, a news report, even a comic book. The goal for them is to break down that wall between so-called high art and the everyday texts that shape our lives. And that, of course, leads us right to the second and maybe even bigger question. Okay, once we've decided what we're looking at, what's the best way to understand it? How should we actually read it to find out what it means? And this is where our glasses come right back into play, because different schools of thought offer totally different answers. A formalist, for example, is going to put on the glasses that focus only on the text itself, the words on the page. But a Marxist critic will use a different lens to see the story through the framework of class and power. They'll ask, who has the money and power here and why? A feminist critic puts on their lens and analyzes the roles of men and women, asking, how are gender roles being portrayed or maybe even challenged? Each lens shows you something new, and no single one is the right one. They're just different ways of seeing. Now, you'd think having all these different approaches would be a great thing, right? More tools in the toolbox. Well, for a while there, it wasn't seen that way. Back in the 80s and 90s, a huge debate blew up in universities that people started calling the theory wars. It was a battle over the very purpose of studying literature. And this really lays out the two sides of that debate perfectly. On one side, you had scholars who believed the main goal was to appreciate a piece of art for its own beauty and craftsmanship. Just focus on the text itself through what they called close reading. But on the other side, you had thinkers who argued that you can't ignore the context. They said we have to look at the culture, the politics, the ideology behind the art, using all those lenses like Marxism and feminism we just talked about. It was a real tug of war for the soul of literary studies. So where did we end up after all that? Well, the most important thing to take away from all this is simple. There is no single correct way to read something. Literary theory isn't about finding the one hidden answer. It's about understanding that any story can hold dozens of different meanings. It's about giving you a whole bunch of tools so you can pick the right one for the job, depending on what questions you want to ask. The most interesting thing isn't just that this toolkit exists, it's that the detectives, the critics, They can't even agree on how to use the tools, or sometimes what they're even looking for in the first place. And these aren't small disagreements either. They're fundamental. They often come from these totally different moral, political, and philosophical beliefs about what literature is even supposed to do in the world. Okay, so for example, what's the end goal of reading? Is it just to appreciate the beautiful, complex artistry inside the text itself? That's what a new critic might say. Focus only on the words on the page. Or is the goal to critique the social and class structures that the story is built on, which is exactly what a Marxist critic would argue. And then there's the question of evidence. What's even allowed in our investigation? Should we only look at the words on the page, the text itself, and ignore everything else, like the formalists and new critics insisted? Or do we bring in the whole historical and cultural shebang, arguing that a book is just one tiny piece of a much, much bigger puzzle? And this might be the biggest fight of all. Who gets to decide what a story means? For centuries, it was simple. The author's intention was king. What they said it meant, that's what it meant. But then, a whole bunch of 20th century theories completely flipped the script. They basically said the author is just another reader, and their opinion about their own work, yeah, it's no more special than yours or mine. So here's the key takeaway, right? Each theory is basically a different lens. It's a specialized tool for your detective kit. They don't cancel each other out, not at all. They just help you see totally different clues. So let's actually look at a few of the big ones. Okay, first up, let's put the text on the therapist's couch with what's called psychoanalytic criticism. This approach, it draws on big thinkers like Sigmund Freud and Jacques Lacan. And it basically treats the story, the characters, even the author like patients. It's looking for all the hidden stuff, the unconscious desires, the symbols, the motivations that are bubbling just beneath the surface.
All right, next up, we have the feminist lens, which kind of zooms out from the individual's mind and focuses instead on big societal power structures.
So, feminist criticism asks some really pointed questions. How does this book or movie deal with gender? How is power split between men and women? And how are women represented? It's all about questioning those traditional gender roles we see over and over again. And finally, for this quick tour, we've got the post-colonial lens. And this one zooms out even further, looking at the massive global legacy of colonialism and empire. This theory is all about investigating how literature deals with the cultural fallout of colonialism. It zeroes in on the historical conflicts, the exploitation, and really tries to amplify the voices and experiences of people who were colonized. But, it's not a perfect toolkit. I love this quote from the theorist Mikhail Bakhtin. He basically pointed out that, hey, no single theory is ever going to be enough, especially for something as wild and constantly changing as the novel. It's such a great reminder that these are just tools, right? They're not universal laws written in stone. Okay, so if all the experts are arguing and no single tool works for everything, you're probably thinking, so what's the point? Why bother with any of this? Well, the goal isn't to find the one correct answer. It's not about winning the argument over what a book really means. The real value is in making the investigation itself richer and deeper. And that right there is the real power of your new detective kit. It gives you the ability to see how meaning gets constructed in the first place. It gives you the tools to analyze our entire culture, not just what's in a book. You go from being someone who just consumes stories to someone who can critically understand them. It really makes you a more powerful reader and thinker. Which, of course, leaves us with a brand new mystery for our own time. What happens when an AI writes a novel? I mean, who's the author? What could authorial intent possibly mean in that case? How can our theories tell us anything about its meaning? It's a fascinating problem, and it's going to force us to ask all these fundamental questions all over again.